The last domain of the COBIT processes is called monitor, evaluate and assess. The second process is to monitor, evaluate and assess the system of internal control, and it has 8 practices. The sixth practice is to plan assurance initiatives. The entities responsible are the business process owners and the Chief Information Officer. The entity held accountable is the Chief Executive Officer. The practice receives 2 inputs, which are the program audit plans from the BAI1 process and the independent assurance plans from the DSS1 process. It generates 3 outputs, which are the assurance plans to be used by all the management processes, the high-level assessments, and the assessment criteria, both to be used internally. The activities involved in this practice include performing a high-level assessment of the process capabilities. The users of the assurance initiative output should be determined, and the control objectives of the critical processes should be selected and agreed on. The seventh practice is to scope the assurance initiatives. The entities responsible include the Chief Operating Officer, the business executives, and the Chief Information Officer. The entity held accountable is the audit function. The practice receives several inputs, which include the root causes of quality delivery failures from the APO11 process, the risk root causes from the APO12 process, and the reports of non-compliance issues from the MEA03 process. It generates 3 outputs, which are the assurance review scope, the engagement plan, and the assurance review practices, all to be used internally. The activities involved in this practice include defining the scope of assurance initiatives by considering the enterprise goals, the set of IT processes, and all the auditable entities to the enterprise. The engagement plan and the resource requirements should be defined. The practices for evaluating the gathered information from the processes should be defined, and practices to validate the control design and outcomes should be established. Practices to identify residual risks should be established when control effectiveness is not acceptable. The 8th and final practice is to execute assurance initiatives. The entities responsible are the business process owners and the Chief Information Officer. The entity that is held accountable is the audit function. The practice receives several inputs that include the risk analysis from the APO12 process, the root cause analysis from the DSS6 process, and the identified compliance gaps from the MEA03 process. It generates 3 outputs, which are the refined scope, the assurance review results, and the assurance review report, all to be used by all the management processes. The activities involved in this practice include refining the scope of the control objectives and testing the effectiveness of the control design. The outcome of the control objectives should be tested, and the impact of the control weaknesses should be documented. Communications with the management should be maintained, and the assurance initiatives should be supervised. Finally, the results of the assurance initiatives should be reported to the management.